Hola Gary, bom dia.
Bom dia, Ivan. Buenos dias.
Yeah, co- como vai?
Tá tudo bem comigo. É você?
Tudo bem? Yeah, tudo bem. Beleza. What languages do you speak, Gary? How many languages do you speak?
Well, I speak Portuguese, but Brazilian Portuguese,
Yeah.
which causes me problems living here in
Uh-huh.
Lisbon, where they speak a kind of Russian. And I
Yeah.
understand French, Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
Italian. But
Mm-hmm.
so I can read French, Spanish, Italian, but I'm a bit rusty from actually speaking. But the Latin languages that are
Yeah.
quite similar to Portuguese. But Portuguese is my main
Yeah.
language because
Wonderful.
uh, yeah.
Wonderful. Where are you from?
I'm originally from England. I spent most of my
You're
life
from
living
England.
in London. Uh, yeah, a
Okay.
little bit of time
Wonderful.
in Italy some time ago, and then I lived in Brazil for a few years in the 90s.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, yeah, this is kind of an international podcast. So, thank you so much for being part of the show, Gary. I'm honored to have you on the show.
Thanks for inviting me, Ivan. It's always
Yeah. So,
one of the things that's really interesting about the new way of being able to produce and distribute music is that the fans are everywhere in the world, and that's really
this is
fantastic.
yeah, yeah. People like to talk on the internet, and I actually found out about your music on Instagram, thanks to
Right.
Instagram advertising, Instagram ads. They are making my life easier, my job easier. And I your video to your song, yeah, Shangri La, really caught my attention. It was a
Shangri-La, yeah.
wonderful video.
Well, that's good because we have to, as musicians, I have this conversation a lot with other musicians, and I think
Hmm.
maybe because I spent many years outside the music industry. I was in the
Yeah,
music business years ago, but spent many years outside of it. So maybe I have a slightly different perspective. But I really think there's so many opportunities now to reach fans, but you have to be prepared to physically reach them because nobody can find you otherwise. So the
absolutely.
Instagram stories it's been really successful for me, a really good way of reaching new
Yeah,
fans
yeah,
and people in different countries.
yeah, yeah, totally. And then I went to your Bandcamp page, and I was listening to your album, and I thought this is great. So I just wanted to say I'm very happy. I'm glad that you have decided to put out your first record, your first album last year. It's a really outstanding album. I think everybody should go and listen to it right now. I was wondering, it took you like 25 years to release this first album, Gods in Brazil. Yeah, which is
Yeah. Well, actually,
is
probably a bit
basically,
longer, Ivan. Probably,
yeah,
yeah.
wow. Yeah. So the first question that came to my mind was just why, why did it take you so long to say like, yes, let's do it?
Okay. Well, I think it's difficult for people who've grown up in the internet era where
Hmm.
access to information and like-minded people is really, really, it's like a click away. If somebody
Yeah,
gives you the name of an artist today, you go online and within 10 seconds you have the whole catalog, YouTube, Spotify, these kinds of things. So
exactly.
back in the 80s, well, when I was a kid, I was really into music, and
Hmm.
I had a band at school, and we played some gigs locally and things like that, and I was obsessed with music. But it was
Yeah.
very hard to, like, nobody knew how to get into the music industry. Nobody really knew how it worked, and if
Hmm.
you didn't have connections, it was almost impossible to. There wasn't even a book how to do it, how to be a musician, how to be
Yeah.
an artist, how to set up a record label, this kind of stuff. So I
Yeah.
think for many years I didn't think it was possible to do it, and I worked in the music industry around music for a long, long time, and always a little bit kind of jealous of my friends that were making music because I really wanted to do it, but I don't think I had the
Hmm.
confidence at the time. And in the
Yeah.
early 90s, like about 1993, I started to really write songs, and I was already like obsessed with Brazilian music for many years. And
Mhm.
I wanted to write songs in the kind of style of the music I was listening to, like the classic Brazilian 60s, 70s stuff.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I started to do that and make some demos on. I had a little Tascam 4-track recorder, with cassettes, and I would make some
Yeah.
demos. And then I had the opportunity to move to Rio and was involved in a music technology business. It was the world's first ever digital download distribution system. And I went
Mhm.
to Rio really to do that, but to kind of be a musician. Except when I got there, all these kids were so amazing musicians, and I was like, oh my god, I can't compete with these guys. They're like, you know, I remember going to a friend's house and he said, "Oh, I don't like the Beatles," and then played three Beatles songs on the guitar perfectly. And I thought,
Okay.
okay, there's too much competition in this country, and so I carried on working in the music business for a long time, but writing
Mhm.
songs and making demos. But really, I didn't show them to anybody else except my friend, my flatmate Cassim, would hear me doing this or hear me playing
Yeah.
guitar in my bedroom and would
Mhm.
say, "Oh, you should do something." And I was, "No, no, yeah, no, it's not. It's not very good. It's not good enough for me."
Yeah.
And I think what I didn't realize back then was that if you can write songs, it doesn't matter if you can play them very well. You can always find people to help you. And many years later, I discovered that
Mhm.
Irving Berlin, the famous Broadway composer, couldn't read and write music. He hired a guy with a piano, and he
Mhm.
would whistle to the guy, and the guy would write the
Mhm.
write the music down. And I thought, oh my god! But this is the kind of thing that in the internet you can find in seconds. This kind of information. But back then in the
Yeah.
early 90s,
Yeah.
it was it was difficult. You everything was much more slow. If you wanted to learn something, you really had to try and find someone who could teach you or show you or help you.
Spend a lot of time. Mhm.
Yeah, so over those 25 years, I had a record label
Yeah.
back in England called What Music, and we reissued a lot of rare Brazilian and Latin jazz from Argentina, some jazz from Finland.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and then I left the
Mhm.
music industry. I got a bit disillusioned with it, lot that with the
Mhm.
business side of things. And for many years, I would keep in touch with Cassine, and his career was getting stronger and stronger in Brazil, mainly as a producer, but also as an artist.
Mhm.
And he would say, "Oh, what
Yeah.
about your album?" And I'd say, "Yeah, well, maybe." And then in 2018, he came to London to play one show with another guy that I already knew, Alberto Continentino, who used to play with Ed Motta when we released Ed's album
Oh,
in
yeah.
2003. And the other two
Mhm.
guys were from Poland. And I thought, wow, this is really crazy.
Mhm.
What's going on here? And after the gig, which was really fantastic, one of the best shows I ever saw, and Cassine said to me when he was packing up all the instruments, "Oh, what about your album?" And I just said, "Yes, yes, let's do it." And I think he was really
Yeah.
surprised, and I don't think he thought it was ever going to happen. But yeah, so we did it, and it's been life changing, really.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. Such a great story, and I was a little bit confused because I was reading your video description on YouTube, and it says produced by Cassine Ting Maya. At first, I thought it was the Ting Maya, the
No, no, because
Brazilian
yeah, because
godfather of soul.
yeah, no, because it's just I think a list of the people that Cassine has worked with. Cassine
Okay, okay.
produced the Tim Meyer Rationale Volume 3.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of Ting Maya, so I
yeah.
was
I met
thinking,
him once, Ivan.
you met him?
Yeah, I spent
Oh.
I spent like 4 or 5 hours in a dressing room in the early hours of the morning with him and an English friend, and he was telling the most
Mhm.
crazy stories. It was unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you live in Brazil for how long? How long did you live
It was
there?
about 4 years, but I was traveling before that. I was traveling regularly because I started to go to Rio to buy records, and I would bring the records back to London. And a
Mhm,
friend
mhm,
of mine who later helped me set up the record label, he had lots of contacts as a record collector, a record dealer, and he would sell the
Mhm.
records on to Japanese DJs. And that's how I
Mhm.
paid for
Mhm.
my trips to Brazil for the early years of the 1990s. And
Wow.
in those days you could buy Tim Meyer Chanel for less than $1 if you could find it, and the
Yeah.
Japanese would pay $500. So it was a it was an interesting business.
Yeah.
And there were
Absolutely.
other English guys doing the same thing as well at the time, um,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
buying. So we were in competition with each other, and we would go to these record stores and think, "Oh, I found a new record store, a new secondhand store." And I remember going
Yeah.
to one, and the woman said, "Oh, we had a guy from England yesterday. He bought everything." So it was like this kind of competition for finding rare records and taking them back to Europe, and
Yeah.
playing them. DJ friends would play them in London, and then they
Mhm.
mostly
Mhm.
get sold to Japan, just like today.
To Japan.
Yeah,
Wow.
because
And
the
what
Japanese
what
knew
do you
everything.
think? Yeah, yeah, I know. And did you travel around South America, or were you only
No, no,
mainly?
yeah, mainly. I guess I always had a bit of an obsession with the idea of Rio, and when I went
Yeah.
there, I was really poor. So when I first moved there, I had no money at all. And the day
Mhm.
that I moved was the day that they started the Real plan, where they made a new currency. The day before, it was
Mhm.
like almost like 1 million cruzeros was about $5. It was crazy. And then
Mhm.
the next day, one real was $1, and it was linked. And suddenly,
Mhm.
Brazil became incredibly expensive as a foreigner.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had to do some jobs, like I was a DJ in a Mexican restaurant with Cassim and this kind of thing. So at that time, things were a real struggle to be a foreign guy, not really legal, not really supposed to work. Your classic thing with somebody immigrating. So I didn't even really have a lot of money to go traveling and this kind of thing. So I was trying to set my music business up at the time in Rio
Yeah. Yeah.
and using all the money that I had to do that.
Okay, I see. I understand now. And where does your where does the love for Brazilian music come from? Like, when did you decided, okay, I want to go to Brazil and start collecting rare records?
Okay, well, yeah. So there are two answers to that, really. The first one is that when I was a kid, and my mum used to listen to the radio, BBC radio, but
Oh,
not Radio One, which was the
okay.
pop music. She would listen to Radio Two, which
Hmm.
was like for older people. So they would play
Yeah.
stuff from the '60s already. Like this would be
Yeah.
like mid '70s, early '70s,
Hmm.
and they would play Sergio Mendes and
Hmm.
Santana, and so it was always this kind of Latin thing that I found
Yeah.
really attractive.
You get that
And
influence. Mm.
yeah, exactly. And as I got older, like when I sort of left home and was working in the mid 1980s, I was really into jazz, like totally into jazz. And I realized as well that a
Hmm.
lot of the jazz that I liked was a kind of bossa thing.
Yeah.
And one day I had a girlfriend, and she said, "Oh, I bought you a cassette for your birthday," and it was Gilberto Gil, which was the first
Hmm.
kind of fully Brazilian, as opposed to Americans with some Brazilians on kind of recording that I heard. And it was very modern, and I didn't like it so much, but there was a couple of tracks on there that made me want to find out more. And around that time, HMV opened a mega store in London, and downstairs they had a basement with world music, as they called it then, and they had
Hmm.
in that in 1985 to 87 all the major Brazilian record labels reissued classic albums, like almost everything, like all the Caetano, all the Gal Costa, all the Elis Regina,
Oh,
Nana Caymmi. I mean, pretty much everything you could imagine.
yeah.
And so I would buy these records because of the covers, like they just looked so exotic to me. And
Hmm.
I would buy the records, I would look at the who wrote the songs, I would go back the next week and try it with a list of names, and they're like, "Oh, Edu Lobo, this guy's really good. Okay, let me see if there's an album by Edu Lobo." And
Yeah.
it was like the internet in massively slow motion. It took a
Yeah.
long time to build up that knowledge, and I didn't realize that there was anybody else, anywhere that was into this kind of music, because there was no way of knowing that. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would make tapes and I would play them to my friends. And when I was like in the '80s, I used to work in a friend's store in Soho, and I would put my tapes on all day, and people would ask what the music was, and that's how we used to share the information, with mixtapes. And
Yeah.
so then I met a Brazilian guy and his wife in London in 1990, and he was
Mhm.
trying to get work in England, and he was a photographer. And he started to tell me
Mhm.
about some of the things he was doing, and he said, "Oh, you won't know any of my work." I said, "Oh, well, tell me." And he said, "Oh, I did this album cover for Caetano Veloso, and I did some for Tim Meyer." And I said, "Yeah, I have both of those albums." And he was like,
Mhm.
"Wow, that's
Wow.
crazy. How did you get them in England? In those days?"
Yeah.
And so we became friends. And a guy that I was working with at the time as well, we decided, let's go to Rio for Carnival in 1991. So for January, February '91,
Uh-huh.
we went for 5 weeks, I think, and stayed with this friend Flavio. And he knew just about
Mhm.
everybody in Rio. So all these guys
Oh.
that I had records from, we would meet, and they
Mhm.
would be just like, "How come there's these crazy English guys that listen to our music?"
Mhm.
Because the world was a smaller place in those days, a bigger place
Oh.
rather in those days.
Yeah, yeah, you
So,
were definitely pioneering that kind of.
well, so we used to go and buy the records, Ivan. We'd go down to the down in the city center
Mhm.
in Rio. There'd be the guys selling secondhand records literally on the street, and we'd just buy the
Mhm.
stuff
Mhm.
that we liked. And then one day, a friend of mine, when I went back to England with a bunch of records, a friend of mine who was into Brazilian music, who came into the store where I worked and heard the tape, and said, "Wow, whose music is this?" That's how we connected in those days. And
Mhm.
and he said, "You're not going to believe this, but that Edo Lobo record is £50, like $75 then, in Mr. Bongo's window in Soho." And I said, "Oh, well, I reckon I could probably find 5 or 10 copies of that." So that's how I started. I didn't realize there were other people. I didn't realize that there was this, starting collectors culture from sort of hip hop and Latin jazz world in London and other cities as well.
Mhm.
So it was almost by accident that I started to deal in the records. But because I knew where to find
Yeah.
them in Brazil, lots of people didn't. So I
Yeah,
would have
yeah, yeah.
friends give me lists. Japanese DJs would give them a list, and then I would go and deal with my record dealers on the street. And I
Mhm.
mean, it really was like that on the street, And I would go there and say, "I'm coming back in three
Mhm.
weeks' time." I'd send them a letter, write a letter by post, send them a
Wow.
letter and say, "I'm going to be. I'll
That's
meet you
good.
on like the March the 20th, at 2 o'clock outside the Teatro Municipal." And so we started to do an exchange of records where I would bring English folk rock, which is something I knew nothing about. They would give me a list of records, and I would buy these really cheap records in England that nobody wanted in
Yeah,
those days, carry
yeah.
them to Rio, and swap them for like João Donato and
Uh-huh.
this like really kind of rare stuff, Moises Santos, and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was really
Wow,
by
that's
accident.
amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So for our young listeners out there, that was
Yes.
the way music
Yes.
was exchanged in the 90s. That's amazing. That's incredible how things have changed. And I think your story is pretty similar to the one of I don't know if you know about Quantic. Have you heard of him? It's also a British DJ and producer who he went to Colombia. He lived there many years, and he did pretty much the same. Like collecting all the rare Colombian music
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
records.
No, it's great, and there were lots of people back then when I was doing it, definitely. And I would
Mm.
hear if someone would say, "Oh, I met an English DJ who's here to buy records. You should meet." And in those days, we were definitely like, "No, he's a competition." So
Mm-hmm.
we never wanted to hear about other guys buying records, and it was like lots of secrecy.
Yeah,
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 it's funny,
absolutely.
but yeah.
Yeah. So, Gods in Brazil. How did you come up with that name? Because I really like it. It's a fantastic name for an album.
You're the first person to ask me that question, Ivan, which I think is
Oh,
extraordinary.
really? Nice. That's
Yeah, I
great.
think it's extraordinary because I think the name needs an explanation, right? Because it makes no sense. Well, there was a song called "Gods of Brazil" that was supposed to be on the album, but it got cut. So that's one
Oh,
answer.
okay.
But the title
Mm-hmm.
comes from that first time when I went to Rio in '91 and I stayed with my friend Flavio. MTV
Mm-hmm.
had just started in Brazil. Okay, it was like a Brazilian,
Mm-hmm.
very Brazilian version of MTV, and most
Mm-hmm.
of the stuff they were showing was old American and British bands because they didn't have enough content to fill 24 hours of programming. So we would
Yeah.
watch MTV, and there would be things like Echo and the Bunnymen would come on, and we'd say, "What,
Yeah.
Echo and the Bunnymen in Brazil?" And Flavio would say, "Oh yeah, they were gods in Brazil." And it was like
Oh.
every band that kind of had been forgotten in England would come on MTV, and he would say, "Oh yeah, they were gods in Brazil." And so it became like a
They were God.
catchphrase for me and my friends, like
Okay.
somebody could be a god in Brazil, you know. So
Yeah.
when we came to do this record, it just seemed like a kind of like a playful title, you know. Maybe it's possible still to be a god in Brazil.
Oh, okay, I got it. So it has to do a little bit with the Brazilian humor. Okay. So you went to Poland to record the album. Why did you decide to go there?
I did,
The
yeah.
recording session.
Um,
Yeah.
and that was because
Um.
the so when so a few years ago, Cassine's got a studio in Rio, and it's above a venue
Mhm.
called Audio Rebel,
Mhm.
and he would finish the studio normally about 8 o'clock in the evening, and there would always be a band starting. And if there was an interesting band, sometimes he would go and just check them out and see, you know, who they were. And one day he told me he was closing up the studio, and he heard this like crazy version of Herbie Hancock's Rocket. So he went to
Mhm.
see what it was, and it was these two guys he didn't know were Polish at the time. These two foreign guys playing the whole of Herbie Hancock's Rocket album. So he stayed and watched it,
Oh.
and afterwards he was introduced
Mhm.
to Macho, the drummer, and Macho
Mhm.
said, "Oh, you're Cassine. I wanted to meet you. Someone told me that you were the guy I had to meet in Rio." So they started talking
Mhm.
about music and things. And Macho said that he had some connections with the Polish government for culture, and they wanted
Mhm.
to do
Oh.
some Brazilian Polish cultural exchange. And would
Mhm.
Cassine be interested in making an album? So they did that, and it's called Mitch and Mitch, which is the Polish band, Mitch and Mitch
Mhm.
and Cassine, and it's called
Mhm.
Visitantes Nordestinos, visitors from the
Mhm.
northeast, because Poland is northeast of Rio, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a little pun there. So they made this album, and then Cassine was invited to Poland by Mitch and Mitch to participate in a festival based on a legendary Polish musician called Zbigniew Wodecki. And
Mhm.
so they did a tour with Wodecki's music, and Mitch in Poland had recreated a lost album of his from the 70s, and that it had been really successful, and in Poland went double platinum. And so they did these festivals, and it went really, really well. And then another
Mhm.
friend of ours, who's Brazilian but based in London, got the band over to play one night in London when I was there. And
Mhm.
so Cassine had this band that was half Polish, two of the guys from Mitch and Mitch, Alberto Continentino from Rio, and him. And
Yeah, I know him.
yeah, and
Mhm.
afterwards I met the Polish guys, and they were like into the same things. And Macho had lived in Sao Paulo, not Rio, but around the same time. Like all of us, he had a Brazilian girlfriend, bought records and took them home and played his friends. You know, same story.
Mhm.
And so we
Yeah.
became friendly. So when Cassine said, "What should we do with the record? You know, how should we make it?" At the time, and even now, but at the time, like 2 years ago, when we first talked about this, Brazil was incredibly expensive, like crazy expensive.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so we said, well, let's see, because Poland is one of the cheaper places in Europe and is famous
Yeah.
for having the orchestras and things like that. So we decided to go to the Polish Radio Orchestra studios in Warsaw,
Mm.
and Macho and Piotr, the pianist on the record, they do a lot of work there. They do all kinds of recording, jazz and things, and they've got a really good relationship with the Polish radio, which is a state radio station. And the studios are incredible.
Mhm.
They're like a time warp. They're from the 1950s and 60s. And
Nice.
so the cost of making it there with all these, you know, classical musicians and everything, and the string sections, and this was probably, you know, like two-thirds of making it in Brazil. And it just, I like the idea as well, Ivan, that my version of Brazil is distorted, okay, because I'm British. And my version of Brazil is from old
Mhm.
records and my romantic imagination. And to
Hmm.
meet these Polish guys who had another romantic version of Brazil that was also
Yeah,
distorted. I really liked that idea, but at the same time, have Alberto and Cassim, who are real Brazilians, kind of managing the
yeah,
arrangements and the production at the same time. So I really liked the
yeah,
idea
yeah,
that it was kind of that it made no sense without knowing the background story.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's great. Alberto Continentino, he's one of my favorites. I'm a bass player too, and
Right.
I love him. I love the
So
way he plays
you
bass.
know how unbelievably good he is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, yeah. So let's listen to some music now. You are going to hear Juanito Caminante, Little Johnny Walker, a wonderful song. I love it. It's like the perfect song for your morning coffee or your morning whiskey if you want. Yeah, it's just a perfect little tune for sunny days. It's going to make you feel happy. So enjoy it and stick around. We will be back in a minute.
Down in Paraguay, there ain't nothing you can't buy, like a shiny gold Rolex or some Hollywood cigarettes. But when it comes to whiskey, things are getting risky. I just want my Johnny Walker, but life is not so easy. I said, Juanito Caminante, so quiero Johnny Walker. Juanito Caminante, Juanito Caminante, Juanito Caminante, so quiero Johnny Walker. Juanito Caminante, Juanito Caminante. Down in Paraguay, there ain't nothing you can't buy, like a nearly gold Rolex or some Hollywood cigarettes. But when it comes to whiskey, things are getting risky. I just want my Johnny Walker, but life is not so easy. I said, Juanito Caminante, so quiero Johnny Walker. Juanito Caminante, Juanito Caminante, Juanito Caminante, so quiero Johnny Walker. Juanito Caminante, Juanito Caminante.
Amigo, yo tengo 4 garrafos de whisky hecho Cuba, hecho con la mejor calidad, hecho con puro malte. Amigo, camine por el lado salvaje, beba whisky, whisky de la Cuba, whisky de fresco cubano, es que de la puta madre.
Juanito Caminante, so quiero Johnny Walker. Juanito Caminante, Juanito Caminante.
Okay, what a wonderful song there. Um, so an international band, you recorded your album in Poland. What a great experience. So how long did it actually take you to record the whole album? How was the whole recording process?
Okay, so there was an element, okay, where I'd sent the demos to the guys, and Macho co-produced because there was a lot of work in Poland, organizing musicians and the studios and
Yeah, yeah.
accommodation and all those kinds of things. And so I'd sent my demos to Macho and to Cassim, and like right up until the day before we were due to go to Warsaw, I hadn't had any conversation with the guys about whether the songs were any good or which songs out of the 20 or so that I'd submitted to them that they wanted to do. And I was a little bit petrified. And so when we got there, we had 5 days of rehearsal in Macho's studio in his house.
Mm-hmm.
And I never did this before, right? So I didn't know the process. And I joked with Cassim recently that that this was kind of like for them it was a day in the office, but for me it was a really big deal. Making my
Yeah,
first album,
new experience.
I'd never sung before. I didn't know really what the process was, other than just a visitor to studios over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we went through each of the songs that we'd chosen. So we literally chose them in one morning, like out of the 20. Let's listen. Yeah, next one. Yeah, next one. Okay, yeah, let's do this one, this one, this one. And that's where
Mm-hmm.
Gods in
Mm-hmm.
Brazil song got cut at that stage. And so we did the rehearsals for each of them. We recorded those. And I had a friend from England come over as well, Adam Askew, who was at the time still one of the senior sound engineers at the BBC Radio. And
Cool.
so he came also a week before to kind of to meet the guys and hear the sound and everything. And he was going to be the guy recording and microphone placement and engineering the session, etc. So it was really kind of everyone getting to know each other, and
Mm-hmm.
that was just a really good process. So we'd done that, and then Cassim had a gig on a Sunday night in Warsaw at a really cool venue called Poglos, with the same
Mm-hmm.
band, Alberto and Macho and Piotr and Milos, who's a percussionist with Mitch and Mitch, and is also one of the directors of the Chopin Conservatory in Warsaw. He's an incredible,
Mm-hmm.
incredible percussionist. So those
Wow.
guys had a gig, and then Cassim said, "Right, we're going to do two of your songs at the end of the show. You're going to have to stand up and sing them." And Ivan, that was probably the scariest thing I ever did in my life. Stand up in front of 300
Really?
people, after Cassim's gig, not before, after. And
Oh gosh.
so that because I was so nervous about that, it completely removed any nerves that I had about going into the studio, which was a good tactic of his, I think. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we went into the studio, and then the first song we did was Adam Fora de Balanço, which is named after this friend, Adam Askew. His name means Adam off balance in English. Askew means out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did that first song, and I didn't really kind of understand what the process was. So I was singing guide vocals, and the band was all recorded live. Um, and it was overwhelming. I think several times during that week when we were recording those songs, I kind of burst into tears because I couldn't quite believe that I was actually doing this after all these years.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely a like super
Yeah.
emotional experience. But even at that stage,
Uh,
Van, I didn't know what I was going to do with the record. Okay, so at one
yeah.
point we were nearly finished the recording in that week, and it was sounding really good. And
Mm-hmm.
Cassim said to me, "So what are you going to do with the album to release it?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. Maybe like I'll make 100 copies and sell it on Bandcamp." And the guys all looked at me like, "What? What do you mean we're doing all this work and that's all you're going to do?" And because it hadn't
For.
really occurred to me that
Mm-hmm.
there would be an audience for this, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
this really for me was like closing a chapter and taking all these songs that have been hanging around in my mind for
Yeah.
many decades, and actually
Mm-hmm.
making something concrete from them. So as the album began to take shape, and then I went to Rio to do the vocals with Cassine and to record the horn sections and some overdubs. And
Mm-hmm.
as I realized that actually it was starting to sound like somebody else's record, in other words, like the level of quality and production was like a commercial record, I started to think a bit more about, what to do with the release and things. But I had no idea for a cover. I didn't really have any plan and strategy at that time. So it was a big
Mm-hmm.
learning curve for me. And I was
Mm-hmm.
completely amazed at the reaction, and that so many fans are like so young as well. I think
Yeah.
most of my fans are like 18 to 35, and I would have imagined when I started that they would have been, my age, which like I'm nearly 55. Um,
Yeah.
but it shows that music just crosses all ages, all boundaries, and
Absolutely.
it's
That
pretty
that was
amazing.
actually my that was actually my next question. How has been the reaction of people and critics to your album?
Well, because it's a really weird situation, yeah. Because I'm with a band who within the within niche music industry with Brazilian music and etc. And the guys in Poland, these guys are
Yeah.
known. So a part of the thing I think was curiosity, like why have these guys made an album with this guy no one had ever heard of? And I thought that's probably the best kind of angle for pitching the record. And I was
Yeah.
really, really lucky that my friend João Donato decided that he loved some of the songs that I'd sent him and was playing them at home every day. And
Mm-hmm.
he was playing in Lisbon and then playing in London. And
Mm-hmm.
Giles Peterson at BBC was a huge fan of Donato, and I've known him not very well, but I've known him for many, many years since I had my record label. And so we went to the BBC studio for Donato to record some live sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And Giles heard my album, and so he got me on the radio with Donato talking about how I knew him and how we worked together years ago and this kind of stuff. And that
Yeah.
really kickstarted everything, because people were calling the BBC and saying, "Where's this album? We can't get it. Where do I find this song?" And because
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't planned to release it for several more weeks, maybe another 6 weeks, so I had to bring the release forward like to that day because people were trying to find the Juanito Caminante song. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
from there, really, it really kicked off. And then the other really big thing that happened was Andrew Jervis at Bandcamp, who's like the main music curator at Bandcamp. He was a
Mm-hmm.
fan of my record label, What Music, many years ago. So
Oh,
for him, it
very
was an
cool.
interesting story. So he put one of my songs as the first track on the Bandcamp Weekly podcast. And that just went kind of crazy. And from there, people started playing it on radio stations and things. And then the other really good source
Mm-hmm.
of fans has been
Wow.
the Instagram stories, which has kind of shown my music to people that never would have seen it, and I never would have imagined
Yeah.
that they were out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think also the music video we talk a little bit about at the beginning of the podcast.
Hmm.
The music video for the song Shangri La is just awesome. That vintage is it 50s 40s look
It's
alike
a
video?
mixture,
What
Ivanas, the 30s
mixture?
and 40s, and the reason that
30s
it
and
is like
40s.
that, yeah, is because
So cool.
thank you. I really I made it myself, and I really love doing that stuff. I've always been
Yeah,
into
I
that kind
love
of.
it. Yeah.
And the reason it's like that is because when I made that, Cassine said, "But you're not in the video," and because just like the cover and just like what I was going to do with the release of the album, I hadn't really considered anything about like promo videos. So I
Hmm.
realized I had to have something for YouTube that wasn't just a picture of the album cover.
Yeah.
And I remembered that on archive.org, there's a lot of public domain material of old newsreels and things. And
Hmm.
back in I don't know when, maybe in the 1980s, there was a big fashion for commercials in Britain, where they would
Hmm.
take old footage and they would repurpose the footage for like a beer commercial or something. And
Hmm.
so I thought, let me see if I can find some interesting images that are, kind of match the theme of that song Shangri La. And I just found so much stuff that it was just like huge fun. and I've been back to the same source to make more video clips as well, because it's just really fascinating to take really old film material and
Yeah.
repurpose it with music, and it takes on a different meaning.
Hmm.
So it's
Yeah,
really fun to
absolutely.
do that.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and also the names of the songs are really cool, like Juanito Caminante, Little Johnny Walker.
Yeah, I had it back in the '90s.
Unbelievable.
I knew a Brazilian guy who I can't remember the reason why, but he had to go to Paraguay for the day to do
Yeah.
something with a visa, and so he took
Uh-huh.
a bus, and it's like an overnight bus, and you get to the border, and you have to
Hmm.
wait like, I don't know, 24 hours, and then you could come back into the country. And Paraguay was famous in those days for being the source of everything pirate and counterfeit, like fake cigarettes
Okay.
and fake Ray-Bans and everything you can imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said, "Oh, they had fake whiskey, fake Johnny Walker called Juanito Caminante," and it stuck in my mind at the time. And I
Yeah,
wrote that
yeah,
song in about 1995, and
yeah.
I used to sing it in my office in Rio and I had some interns working with me, and I used to drive them crazy. And 25 years later, one of them's living in New Jersey with a family and everything. And I just didn't say anything. And I just sent him the video clip in the studio of Juanito Caminante being made into an actual record. And yeah, he couldn't believe it. He was like, "No, it's too catchy. I don't want to ever hear it again."
Yeah.
But
So it comes from the Brazilian humor. It's
yes,
also
totally.
I lived in Germany for around 12 years, and
Uh-huh.
I had a few friends from Brazil, and we were always laughing because they are, they have this sort of humor where they, no matter what you say, they find something funny to say
Yes.
with
And I
what
think the
they say.
British have that as well. I think
Yeah,
the British humor, like
yeah.
Monty Python, and laughing at things
Oh,
that,
Monty Python, of
yeah,
course. Yeah,
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 and
yeah.
Monty Python's really big in Brazil, right? So like when I was living
Yeah,
there in the
really.
'90s, my friends would all have VHS videos of Monty Python in those days.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's a definitely similar humor. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you feel now after you have released your album? I mean, we had the pandemic. We are still. Are you also quarantining over
Yes,
there in
yes.
Portugal?
It's
Are you
officially it's
under
been
lockdown?
relaxed in Portugal,
Yeah.
but it's like when people ask me if I'm ready to go out, I say, when Apple releases a new iOS for the phone, and you really don't want to be the first one to download it in case your phone dies. Well, yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm staying in quarantine for a bit longer until we see what happens, because already there's been a spike in COVID cases since the relaxation is very light. It's not
Mm,
completely open, but it's already looking a bit scary. Um, and
mm-hmm.
it's I mean, I work at home anyway, so part of it is not so strange for me, like compared to friends who go to an office and things where their lives have been really changed a lot, or they have their kids at home or something. So that side of it hasn't changed a lot
Yeah.
for me. But um, yeah, it's a weird one. We did 9 songs because I've got a new album that I've been working on. um,
Mm-hmm.
25 years for the first one, and like 6 months between the first one and the second one being recorded. Um, so we did 9 songs in Lisbon with the same band, and my friend Domenico Lancelotti as well, who's the voice on Juanito Caminante with the whiskey cellar. He's living in
Mm-hmm.
Lisbon, so it was great to get him in on the album as well this time, playing percussion and drums. And we did 9 songs in 3 days. So we compressed the whole experience of last time was compressed into three days. And when the lockdown started, we said, "Oh, let's maybe do one more song." So I wrote a song on the day of lockdown that started. It came into my head like in one go. I made a demo and I sent it to Cassine, and he fixed it up and sent the parts to Macho in Warsaw, and he played the
Yeah.
drums. And then it went to Alberto in outside Rio, where he was with his family, and he did the bass. And then it went back to Cassine in Rio, and he did some crazy guitar. And then it went to back to Warsaw to Pedrinho, as we call him, Piotr, the keyboard player. Then back to Lisbon
Mm-hmm.
to me to do the vocals. And it was the first time we've done a track like that, where it wasn't the whole band in the studio. but it's really good. So now that the album has 10 songs instead of 9, which is good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So, yeah, Gary, it's been so nice talking to you. We've been talking for over 40 minutes now.
Yeah, no, you can't stop me on this subject, though, Ivan. We could go on for 2 hours easily.
Yeah, I love to talk about music. Is there anything else you want the world to know about your music, about Gary?
Yeah, I think one thing that I would say is like it's never too late. There's a song
Yeah.
on the first album, "Follow Your Heart," which is kind of about that, and it
Mm-hmm.
is more so now than ever before. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, or how old you are, or anything. If you've got something creative to say, you should just do it, because now there are opportunities to reach people and fans in a way that never existed. 25 years ago, for example. Um, so I would just say,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you feel that
Yeah.
you should be doing, just do it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think it's so nice what you are saying, and I think this episode is going to be so special because it will show the people, like,
Perfect.
how was life before the internet, how was music produced and consumed before and after the internet. So I love talking about these kinds of things. So thank you so much, Gary.
Okay, so just my name. You put my name, Gary Corben.
So where can we get your music? Where can people get your music?
Okay, so just my name. If you put my name, Gary Corben, Corben, into Google, there's a whole bunch of stuff that will come up there.
Yeah, you
Spotify,
are everywhere, right?
yeah, yeah,
On
and all the digital
Instagram at
platforms,
Gary
yeah.
Corben, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Instagram is really good.
Yeah,
I'm on Facebook, but I have
great.
to say Instagram is really good because lots of interaction. And I always, every fan, if I can, I may have missed a few, but nearly every person that follows me on Instagram, I say hi to and start a conversation, because it's
Okay.
such a good way of
Yeah,
engaging
that's
with
great.
people. Yeah, I
Yeah,
really
yeah.
enjoy that.
Instagram for this day and age is a really good tool to communicate. Um,
Exactly.
okay, Gary. So thank you very much for being part of the podcast.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Ivan. It's always a
Yeah,
pleasure
it was a really nice
to
chat.
talk about music.
I'm going to sleep now because I'm here in Ecuador. I live in the Amazonian rainforest,
Yeah.
and it's
What time is
almost
it there?
3 a.m. in the morning. It's almost
Ah,
3.
God. Oh, well,
Yeah,
I appreciate you setting the time. I'm always best I'm a morning person, definitely. I'm always best in the
yeah,
morning.
yeah. Oh, it's fine. It's fine. I slept a couple of hours before. Yeah, but it's okay. I slept a couple of hours before the show, so I'm fit now, and but it's time
Perfect.
to go to bed too. So you will find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, anywhere you can find podcasts. So subscribe if you like it, and thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you, Ivan.
Thank you so much, Gary. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Driving in my car, I wonder where you are. The sun is going down, you know where to be found. In my Puma with the top down, I'm not gonna hang around if you're not gonna show. I'm gonna go with her now. Driving in my car, I wonder where you are. The sun is going down, you know where to be found. In my Puma with the top down, I'm not gonna hang around if you're not gonna show. I'm gonna go with her now. If you want to ride in my Puma, girl, I'll see you there in Prada Junior. I'll take you for a ride in my Puma, girl. I'm gonna show you now, I'm not just a crooner. My friends tell me that you're way out of reach, but tonight there'll be a party on the beach. You know it's New Year's Eve, the sun is shining down in this purple Puma. We're gonna paint this town. ride in my Puma, girl, I'll see you there in Prada Junior. I'll take you for a ride in my Puma, girl. I'm gonna show you now I'm not just a crooner. A Puma may not be a Lamborghini, girl, but you're so sexy in your bikini, girl. Tonight is New Year's Eve, tomorrow's gonna be a brand new day, 1973. A cada arranque do poçante é mais um sonho de encontrar essa mulher esfuziante. É o champanhe a cada gole, me faz a sua lembrança esfumaçar. E eu acelero, passando pela praia, o vento no meu rosto. Olho pelo meu retrovisor, vejo a garota dos meus sonhos a me chamar. Acelera o meu Puma, que mais parece um corcel, um leão deixando rastros pelo chão. A cada esquina, à espreita ela está. Não consigo te encontrar, mas o coração já está no para-choque para chegar antes. À meia-noite, no compasso do meu peito, com cada explosão dos fogos de alegria no céu, eu sinto como uma valsa entre a multidão. Eu, você e nós dois, é meu Puma 72. If you want to ride in my Puma, girl, I'll see you there in Prado Junior. I'll take you for a ride in my Puma, girl. I'm gonna show you now I'm not just a crooner. A Puma may not be a Lamborghini, girl, but you're so sexy in your bikini, girl.